Hello everyone, welcome to another video. This video we're going to be introducing iterations. So iteration is basically a way to repeat block code in your program. So the simpler term that most programmers like to use is that iterations are you're creating a looping structure that repeats certain lines of code. And in Python, there are three ways to do so. The first is a while loop, is a condition-based loop. Basically, as long as a condition, a Boolean expression within the while loop is true, within the condition part area, as long as that's true, it's going to continuously execute the code that belongs to it. Then there's a for loop. It's an iteration technique that executes the code block that it has while it traverses through an iterable object. And if you don't know what an iterable object is, there are data structures that can be looped over or iterated through to access an individual element at a time. So most often we use for loops, grabbing the first value in like a data structure, and then we act or apply some code onto it, which belongs to the code for loop's code block, and then we grab the next one and do stuff, and the next one and do stuff until we run out of stuff in our data structure. So basically, the main difference between a while loop and a for loop is that while loop has potential to be going on for infinite, because as long as that condition is true, we can continue to repeat the code. Whereas for loop is really, I'll only loop or repeat this code block as long as it has a value that it can assign it to the iterating variable that the for loop contains. Okay. And on the more difficult type of iteration in Python, it's called recursion. Okay, it's a programming technique where a function calls itself to solve a problem by breaking it down into small instances of the same problem. Recursion, we'll have an entire lesson and basically a unit on this, as it is very difficult, and we'll be looking at some questions that require recursion. But most often, unless you see a solution or a problem that is very recursive in nature, as most people like to call, you would use recursion, but otherwise you would use either a while loop or a for loop. Okay, so when we're using iterations, there are some rules and mindset I want you to have, and this is like a way of thinking and to help you choose which loop to use. Okay, so first and foremost, if you're comfortable with a while loop, it can basically solve any iteration-based problems. Okay, so any iteration problem can be solved with the while loop, but not all for loops can solve a while loop-based solution. Okay, this is because a while loop can have a complex condition that a for loop can't really mimic, and also a while loop can technically go on infinitely while its condition is true. So it allows us to do it over and over and over again without it being dependent on a data structure. But a for loop is always going to be finite. It's always going to have this finite set of data structure, and we're going to look at all the individual values in it, regardless if we use it or not. Okay, but in Python, a for loop is often considered to be faster in terms of performance. Okay, and the main reason is that, well, a for loop doesn't have a condition that it needs to check if to be true for it to now execute the code block. A while loop, after a single run through of this block code, it will go back to its condition and reevaluate the condition. Whereas a for loop, it just grabs the next value and goes again. It's very simple for the for loop to continue this loop. Whereas a while loop, if the condition that is attached to it is complex, it can slow your program down. Now, a for loop and a while loop, like their speed isn't always like for loop is better than a while loop. It really depends on the code block or the block of code that belongs to each iteration. But generally, if you're writing the same solution and doing the same efficient level code in the code block, the for loop should be performing better. Okay, and then lastly, we can talk about nesting. We don't really want to have a loop within a loop within a loop within a loop within a loop. Okay, the maximum level you should go is either a loop within a loop or a loop within a loop in a loop, like 3 or 2. Okay. Basically, beyond that, it gets very, very complicated. And to be honest, it's hard to manage, hard to fix bugs. And to be honest, you shouldn't need that many loops to solve problems unless it's like a set algorithm that exists right now where it's like the only known way to solve that. Okay. So let's look at some basic coding examples. So let's talk about while loop. So we use a while loop when we don't know when to end our loop. So what you want to do is initialize a condition variable to make the loop run. All right, so you want to have like some sort of a condition, or you can even write a condition here, but you want a variable that is initialized prior and that is going to be changed within your code block of your while loop. Okay, so in this one here, I'm just saying while this is true, while this condition variable is true, I'm going to execute all this. Okay, so I have a little password guesser and my password set to poop. All right, and we're going to make sure that at least at one point, our condition variable is going to be becoming false, making our while loop basically terminate or stop executing its code as long as this is false. Okay, so as long as this is true, it's going to infinitely do this line of code over and over and over and over and over again until at some point that this becomes false. So let's actually run this program. So if I were to run this program and I said, oh, is it hello? It's incorrect. Password incorrect. QWERTY incorrect. See, like we haven't got the password yet, but as soon as I input the word poop, which is our password that's been set, right, we got the correct guess. Okay, so this is how we can use a while loop, where as long as this condition is true, we get to continuously execute the code within. Whereas a for loop is different. A for loop is really often used, and you use this to like look at each value in some sort of a iterable object. And here we're using a list, and we're gonna search for a fruit. Okay, I'm gonna search for maybe apple, banana, kiwi, or strawberry. And what it's gonna do, fruit name, like you're gonna write a for loop like this, where after the word in, you're gonna provide the iterable object, and we're gonna create a variable name. In this case, I called it fruit name, which is gonna just represent each item inside our iterable object one by one until the end. So first, fruit name is going to be apple, and it's going to compare it to the user input we give. And if this condition doesn't meet, we continue on with their code. Well, it will continue on with our code anyways, but it won't execute this code. Right? The fruit name will become banana. Then after its iteration execution, fruit name will become kiwi. And then the next iteration, the fruit name will be strawberry. And then it's finished because there's no more items to check. So if I were to look for kiwi, it's going to output that kiwi's found. But if I were to run this program again, and let's say I'm looking for watermelon, right, it's not going to be found. Like this fruit name wasn't we didn't find a fruit name that was equivalent to watermelon, so we didn't end up finding it. We actually exited our for loop once we ran out of fruit names to have, and it just outputted watermelon is not found. So those are the two most basic ways to do iteration in Python. You should really be comfortable with both, and when given a problem, it will be your decision to choose which loop to use. Okay, but most often, if you're looking through like a container of things and you're looking at individual items, well, sounds like you're going to use a for loop, whereas a while loop is like, well, there is no really set end, right? Where we're looking for this condition and we're going to continuously look for this condition until something is found. That's when you want to use a while loop. Okay, so from now on, starting from this video onwards, we will be incorporating iterations in our video. And as always, thank you for watching and stay classy.